So, Tim, we're on a slightly different mission this year, but before we start to talk about what the research is going to entail, perhaps you could just give us a brief reminder of what it was that you guys got up to last year.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, so it's great to be back in Australia and taking a break from the season finale of Brexit this week. And really, it's a great reminder of a year ago when Greg Clark and myself produced and launched Creating Great Australian Cities. We really, during that process, three essential findings, I think, became abundantly clear to us. Firstly, that the changing character of metropolitan growth in Australia and its cities, as you go through this growth cycle, risks inadvertently creating cities that are low livability, low amenity, and that has all kinds of effects on political appetite, on growth appetite, performance, perception, experience of our cities. Secondly, we noticed through all the work that we did that the brand of most of Australia's leading cities is currently well ahead of the product that's being experienced, and that risks in all sorts of ways damaging expectations, creating disappointment, causing all kinds of missed opportunities, I think, for what these cities can be and can create. And then we also observed, looking at many other cities and any other national systems of cities around the world, that in Australia there's a curious situation where most cities operate in a context where there's an equilibrium of low trust, low partnership, whether that's between levels of government, across different municipalities, whether that's between public and private sector, whether that's between businesses and residents. And this low trust equilibrium, as we call it, creates a tendency in Australia for a slowness in relation to the appetite for reforms, a relatively limited track record of innovation in terms of how we govern and plan and lead and develop our cities. And of course, this has a big implication for the experience of people on the ground living and breathing in places where we also see that there's been a relatively limited track record of what's been created in Australia's cities in the recent cycle. And the reason that this is important is because great places and the curation and creation of great places isn't just something that's nice to have and nice to enjoy. It's not an optional extra, if you like. It actually is becoming increasingly fundamental to how cities perform as individual units, as collections of places within their country. And you can see that in all the areas in which Australia's cities fell behind in all of the measures and the benchmarks over the last period of time against cities like their peers in Canada, whether it's their peers in the southwest of the USA, their peers in Central Europe or Scandinavia, or in the fast improving cities of Asia, actually it's often the areas where place can be both a cause but also a catalyst of the change in performance for Australia's cities that we've really noticed, whether it is in terms of the ability to create an uptick in terms of livability, whether it's about the ability of these cities to be competitive in terms of what they can attract, who they can compete for, how they can compete for certain kinds of mobile activity. It's also really important in the impact of the ability to revive outer suburbs, revive regional cities, and create new sources of demand. We notice more and more as the economy pivots from a corporate and a primary commodities economy towards an innovation economy, place becomes an even more important ingredient of the ability to accommodate enterprise, to accommodate and create stickiness for talent. Of course, place is also where identity and belonging often are forged, and there's a certain imperative for Australia's cities to do more of that and do that better over the next period of time. So these impacts are the outcomes of great places and better places, and these impacts are not felt in the same way, in the same scale everywhere, but they're felt in different combinations, they're taken forward by different stakeholders, they have different effects, they're magnified in different places at different times in different business cycles, but we do observe that place isn't just something to enjoy, although it is very important that we do enjoy it. It is, and it's not just an enhancer of lifestyle and an opportunity for more visitor economy. It can have all kinds of spillover effects on how our cities perform, how our assets perform. Now, what we've also observed is that measuring those impacts is notoriously difficult. Many of you in the room will spend a lot of time trying to develop the case for those impacts. But we observe that because of the various indirect and direct effects, the way that these induce certain things, they substitute for others, there are certain feedback loops in the way that creating great places can affect other things. How we measure it is difficult. But we do observe there's a growing recognition that place is an ingredient of competitiveness, and that the world is trying to measure and study and analyze cities for how well they're creating great places. And what we see when we look at that emerging data set, and it's going to grow and grow over time, is that actually none of Australia's cities feature in the top 20 cities in the world in terms of the neighborhoods and places, those places that are specifically revered, admired, and treasured, whether it's by people within this country or people who are sampling it or even guessing it or learning about it from afar. So there's a real question mark here about to what extent Australia's cities have created great places and what opportunity there is to do much better in this domain. And for this reason that we observed in the last year's report that actually a higher standard of placemaking, a much more improved approach to the way that we manage places in this country needs to come forward as one of the core agendas. And there's certainly an imperative for better partnership in how that is done in all kinds of ways. And one thing that's very clear as well over the last period of time is that everybody's beginning to recognize this, that policy, that the private sector are recognizing the value of place and creating all kinds of strategic thinking around what it means and how can we recalibrate place for people, how can we think about place in a different way as a catalyst in all these sorts of ways. So these things are very welcome, and we observe that this is a promising evolution in the thinking about place in Australia's cities. But it does beg the question, are we as urban practitioners, if you like, in the room, whether we're in the public or private or civic sector, when we use the language of density or proximity or intensification or growth management or fine-grain urbanism, are we using the language that's really going to resonate with the wider public? Are we really explaining what it is that we love and what our publics love about cities? Are we really understanding and communicating what are the dividends of great places? What are the things that a great place can create for you, for your community, and for your city? Are we actually celebrating, through use of that language, the great places we already have and the opportunity to create even more? These are the kind of questions that are motivating this year's research and which we're really putting our heads towards over the next period of time of analysis and the engagement. And I think the reason why this is so important because otherwise there's a risk that we already see very obvious that the conversation becomes entirely monopolized by negative stereotypes about what growth means for the cities of this country, and all the kind of stories that it's very, very easy to pick out just for a very immediate sampling of what the media and what the public sentiment is about growth in this country. And therefore, there's a real question mark about how do we develop a better shared language, a better shared understanding about what it means to be a great place and what really is a place. And in that vein, over to you, Kate.